History remembers the gold, the mask, and the silent glory of a tomb. But behind the shimmering facade of the boy king lay a reality far more haunting. Imagine a child born into a palace of shadows, where every breath was a battle and every step was a struggle against a failing body. Before he was a god, he was a prisoner of his own bloodline. Tonight, we peel back the golden mask to reveal the fragile human within. This is the tragic life of Tutankhamun, as you have never heard it before. If you are listening to my stories right now, I wonder, where in the world are you joining me from? Perhaps in the quiet of the night, or amidst the rush of the day. Wherever you are welcome here. But before we step further into the shadows of this enigma, if you are a soul drawn to the whispers of the past and the mysteries the world forgot, you have found your sanctuary. Join our growing circle of seekers by subscribing to Dreamy Old Stories. Together, let us journey into the depths of history where the truth remains hidden and every story carries a secret. Welcome back. This is Dreamy Old Stories, and today we uncover a tale that was never meant to be told. The palace rises along the edge of the river, its walls pale under a dim and early sky that has not yet decided on morning. Columns stand in long rows, carved with figures that watch from every angle, their stone eyes fixed in quiet attention. Courtyards open into shaded passages where light falls in narrow strips, touching the ground and then slipping away again. Servants move along these paths with lowered heads, their linen garments brushing softly against the floor. There are no banners raised in sudden celebration, no visible sign that anything new has entered the world. The structure holds its form with a reserved presence, as if waiting before allowing any change to settle inside it. Inside, the air carries a mixture of faint oils and warm dust, blending into a scent that lingers in every enclosed space. Lamps burn with small, steady flames, releasing thin threads of smoke that drift upward and gather along the ceiling. The sound of footsteps is softened by woven mats placed carefully across the stone, turning each movement into something barely heard. Voices pass between rooms in low murmurs, shaped more by caution than by emotion. Somewhere deeper within, a single cry rises and then fades, not loud, not sharp, but enough to travel through the layered corridors. It reaches distant corners gently, like a ripple that touches the edges of still water without disturbing its surface. The moment of arrival unfolds without a sudden break or clear signal. A group of attendants moves with deliberate care, carrying cloths and small vessels, their actions guided by long practice gestures rather than urgency. A doorway opens briefly, allowing a narrow beam of light to fall across the floor before it is closed again. Beyond it, quiet instructions are given, hands shifting objects from one place to another, arranging what is needed in a slow and continuous sequence. The rhythm of the palace adjusts slightly, not in a dramatic way, but enough to suggest that something has begun. A new presence is acknowledged not through announcement, but through the careful rearrangement of attention. For those who live within these walls, the meaning of this birth settles in gradually, shaped by what has come before. The memory of recent years does not lift easily, and it lingers behind every glance and every measured word. There is awareness, though it is not openly expressed, that this child enters a place already filled with uncertainty. The future is not imagined in clear images, but in fragments that remain undefined. Even in this earliest moment, the life that has just begun is connected to a larger story that feels incomplete. The palace does not celebrate loudly, yet it does not ignore what has happened. It holds the event quietly, allowing its weight to rest within the spaces where thought and silence meet. Beyond the inner chamber, the palace extends into a series of long passageways where painted walls begin to lose their brightness under layers of age. Figures of gods and kings continue along the surfaces, but their colors soften as the light fades toward the outer edges. Open courtyards reveal patches of pale sky, framed by stone that absorbs the warmth of the rising sun. Guards stand at intervals, their posture steady, their expressions unreadable, as if they have been placed there as much as they have chosen to stand. In these spaces, movement continues at a measured pace, shaped by routine rather than by the arrival of something new. As the morning slowly takes form, the sounds within the palace begin to gather in quiet layers. The faint brushing of sandals against stone joins the distant call of birds near the riverbank. Somewhere water is poured from a clay vessel, its soft rhythm echoing briefly before being absorbed into the larger hush. The air feels slightly warmer now, carrying the dry scent of sunlit dust mixed with traces of incense that drift from inner rooms. There is no single sound that defines the moment, only a blending of small details that create a steady and subdued atmosphere. Even the voices that pass through these halls seem shaped to fit within this restrained environment. In one shaded chamber, a servant pauses while adjusting a folded cloth, her hands slowing for a brief moment before continuing. Another figure passes by the entrance, glancing inward without stopping, as if acknowledging something without needing to see it fully. The doors to the birth room remain closed, yet the presence inside them seems to extend outward in subtle ways. A messenger waits near a column, shifting his weight slightly from one foot to the other, though no clear instruction has yet reached him. The palace does not change its rhythm entirely, but certain movements feel more deliberate, as though guided by a quiet awareness that spreads without being spoken. Within the minds of those who serve and observe, thoughts begin to form without taking clear shape. Some consider what this child may represent, though they do not speak these ideas aloud. Others focus only on their immediate duties, choosing not to look beyond the tasks placed before them. There is a sense that the future has shifted slightly, though no one can yet define how or why. The birth does not erase what has already been lived through, and it does not offer immediate clarity. Instead, it settles into the background of awareness, becoming something that will be understood slowly over time, rather than in a single moment. In a chamber set farther from the center, where fewer footsteps pass and the walls carry older carvings, the arrangement of objects begins to reflect a quiet preparation. Low tables hold small jars sealed with wax, their surfaces marked with careful symbols that indicate their contents. Linen cloths are folded in neat layers, stacked with attention to alignment rather than speed. A narrow window allows a thin line of light to enter, tracing its way slowly across the floor and touching the edges of these items. Nothing here appears newly made, yet everything feels gathered with purpose, as though each object has been chosen to support something delicate and uncertain. The air within this room feels heavier, carrying a deeper blend of scents that settle close to the skin. There is the faint bitterness of herbs crushed into oils, mixed with a softer trace of warmed linen that has absorbed both heat and touch. Breathing here seems slightly slower, shaped by the density of the space itself. From beyond the doorway, distant sounds arrive in softened forms, as if filtered through layers of stone and fabric. Even the smallest movements, like the turning of a hand or the shifting of weight, create a quiet presence that lingers for a moment before fading into the surrounding stillness. A woman seated near the wall adjusts her posture, her hands resting briefly in her lap before reaching again toward the table beside her. She lifts one of the jars, examining it not with urgency, but with a kind of careful attention that suggests familiarity rather than concern. Nearby, another attendant moves a cloth slightly closer to the center of the table, aligning it with the edge, as though this small correction holds importance. The sequence of actions continues without pause, each movement following the last in a way that feels practiced and unspoken. No single gesture stands out, yet together they form a quiet pattern of preparation that unfolds gradually. For those within this space, the meaning of their actions is not expressed through words, but through a steady awareness that rests beneath each motion. The child who has entered the world remains unseen to most of them, yet his presence shapes their attention in subtle ways. There is no clear image of what lies ahead, only a sense that what has begun will carry consequences beyond this room. The past, with all its weight, does not disappear, and the future does not reveal itself fully. Instead, both seem to meet here in a quiet intersection, where care is given not because certainty exists, but because it does not. At the far edge of the palace complex, where administrative rooms gather near shaded courtyards, the physical surroundings take on a different character. Walls here are less adorned, their surfaces marked more by use than by display. Low benches line the edges of open spaces, and writing tables stand with reed brushes resting beside shallow ink palettes. Scrolls are stacked in careful bundles, tied with thin cords that hold their shape over time. A single doorway opens toward the river, allowing a narrow current of air to pass through, carrying light dust that settles across the surfaces in a fine and even layer. The space feels shaped for function rather than ceremony, yet it holds its own quiet importance. The sensory quality of this area carries a muted dryness, where the scent of papyrus and ink replaces the oils and linens of the inner chambers. Fingers brush lightly against the textured surface of scrolls, producing a faint rasp that blends into the low murmur of distant activity. The sound of a brush touching ink creates a soft, almost rhythmic contact, followed by the subtle glide across prepared sheets. Outside, the distant presence of water can be sensed more than heard, a quiet indication of the river's steady flow beyond the walls. The atmosphere here feels grounded, shaped by repetition and routine rather than by any singular event. A scribe pauses mid-task, his hand hovering briefly above the page before continuing with measured strokes. Another figure leans closer to a table, adjusting the position of a scroll so that its edge aligns more precisely with the surface beneath it. A small exchange occurs between two attendants, their words brief and controlled, before they return to their respective duties. No announcement arrives to alter their work, yet there is a slight shift in attention, a momentary awareness that passes between them without being named. The rhythm of their actions continues, though touched by a subtle recognition that something within the palace has changed. Within these working spaces, the birth of the child takes on a different form of meaning, one shaped less by emotion and more by implication. The presence of a new life suggests future records to be written, decisions to be preserved, and events to be noted in careful detail. Those who write do not dwell on the child himself, but on what his existence will require of them over time. There is an understanding that what has begun will extend into the work they perform, influencing the patterns of their days in ways not yet visible. The moment does not interrupt their tasks, yet it quietly enters them, becoming part of the unfolding record that they will carry forward. Closer to the inner courts, where light gathers more fully and the walls carry brighter pigments. The arrangement of space begins to reflect a different kind of attention. Tall columns rise with painted bands of red and gold, their surfaces smoother, more carefully preserved. The floors are swept more often here, leaving fewer traces of dust, and the doorways are framed with carvings that appear sharper, less worn by time. Small statues rest in alcoves, their forms positioned with intention, facing inward toward the life of the palace rather than outward toward the city. The architecture does not change dramatically, yet its refinement suggests a place where presence is observed more closely. The air in these inner areas carries a softer warmth, touched by the scent of fresh oils that have recently been applied to skin and hair. A faint sweetness lingers, not strong, but noticeable as one moves from one chamber to another. The sound of fabric is more distinct here, the brushing of fine linen producing a lighter, almost whispering tone. There is also the quiet clink of small ornaments, subtle and brief, marking movement in a way that feels more delicate than in other parts of the palace. Even the light itself seems to move differently, reflecting off polished surfaces and settling in gentle patterns across the floor. A group of attendants passes through one of the corridors, their pace steady but slightly more attentive than before. One of them pauses near a doorway, adjusting the position of a hanging cloth so that it falls more evenly along the frame. Another lowers her gaze as she steps aside, allowing someone from within to pass without interruption. These actions are not directed by clear instruction, yet they unfold with a shared understanding, as if each person senses the need for greater care. The presence of the newborn does not announce itself, but it seems to draw a finer precision from those who move within these spaces. For those who inhabit these refined areas, the meaning of the birth begins to take on a quieter, more personal dimension. It is not spoken openly, yet it is felt in the way attention sharpens, in the way movements become more considered. There is an awareness that this child belongs to a place of visibility, where every detail may carry significance over time. The future is not imagined clearly, but it is sensed as something that will unfold under careful observation. In this awareness, the palace does not become louder or more expressive. Instead, it becomes more attentive, holding the moment with a subtle recognition that something small has entered, yet may come to shape something far larger. Beyond the palace walls, the wider city stretches along the river, its structures built from mud brick and shaped by the steady rhythm of daily labor. Narrow paths wind between homes, where doorways open into shaded interiors and flat rooftops hold the warmth of the early sun. Small market spaces begin to gather quiet activity, with baskets arranged and goods set out in careful rows. The temple towers rise above everything else, their height visible even from a distance, marking the presence of something greater than the lives that move below them. From this vantage, the palace appears distant, its details softened, its significance understood more by its outline than by what happens within it. The air outside carries a different mixture of sensation, one shaped by open space and movement rather than enclosure. There's the scent of earth warmed by sunlight, mixed with the faint presence of river water that drifts through the streets. Sounds travel more freely here, the low murmur of voices blending with the occasional call of traders preparing for the day. The touch of the ground underfoot feels uneven in places, textured by footprints and the marks of passing carts. Light spreads more fully across these spaces, creating areas of brightness that shift as the sun continues its slow rise. A man pauses near the edge of a narrow street, adjusting the position of a bundle resting on his shoulder before continuing forward. Nearby, A woman arranges small items on a woven mat, shifting them slightly to create a more balanced display. A child moves past them, stepping carefully around a shallow patch of water before disappearing into another path. None of these actions are connected by intention, yet they unfold within the same morning, shaped by the same passage of time. The birth within the palace does not alter these movements directly, yet it exists alongside them, part of the same unfolding day. For those who live beyond the palace, the meaning of such a birth is distant, filtered through layers of separation that soften its immediacy. Some may hear of it later, carried through quiet exchanges or passing remarks, while others may not consider it at all. Life continues in patterns shaped by need and habit, where the future is measured in smaller intervals. Yet even without clear awareness, the presence of a new ruler has already entered the structure of their world. It is not felt as a sudden shift, but as something that will reveal itself gradually, through changes that arrive over time, settling into lives that continue forward without pause. A royal birth, yet no celebration. Tutankhamun opened his eyes to a palace where the walls didn't speak. They exhaled a heavy silence. But this isolation was only the beginning. How does a child grow when surrounded by golden walls, but empty of human touch? We now enter the corridors of a childhood where luxury was a prison, and every shadow held a secret. The rooms prepared for the young Tutankhamun stretch wide beneath high ceilings, where painted scenes rise above him in colors that feel distant rather than welcoming. Beds are carved with care, their frames shaped like sacred forms, yet they stand larger than his small body requires. Chairs, tables, and chests are placed with precision, leaving wide spaces between them that emphasize their separation rather than their use. Curtains hang in long folds beside tall openings, moving slightly with passing air. The scale of everything around him suggests importance, yet it also creates a quiet distance between the child and the world meant to hold him. Within these spaces, the atmosphere carries a softness that feels more hollow than comforting. The faint scent of linen and polished wood lingers in the air, touched lightly by oils that have been applied without excess. Footsteps sound gentle against the floors, their echoes traveling farther than expected before fading. Voices reach him in careful tones, measured and controlled, as if shaped to avoid leaving any lasting impression. Even the light seems filtered, entering through narrow openings and settling across surfaces without warmth. The experience of being here is not harsh, yet it lacks the closeness that might gather around a child in smaller, more crowded places. At times, figures move through the room with deliberate care, adjusting objects that have already been arranged, straightening edges that have not shifted. A servant may pause to place a small item within his reach, then step back without waiting for a response. Another may pass through carrying folded cloth, their attention fixed ahead rather than toward him. There are moments when he looks toward the doorway, as if expecting someone to enter, but the space beyond remains occupied only by passing shapes that do not stop. These small actions form a pattern, one where presence is brief and attention is guided more by duty than by connection. Within his awareness, the absence of something unnamed begins to take shape, though it does not arrive as a clear thought. He senses the difference between being surrounded and being accompanied, even if he cannot express it. The rooms provide everything required for comfort, yet they do not offer a feeling of belonging. Faces appear and disappear, voices speak and fall quiet, but none remain long enough to form a steady presence. In this early stage of his life, the world presents itself as complete in form, but incomplete in feeling, leaving him to grow within a space where care is present, yet closeness remains just beyond reach. Beyond his sleeping chamber, the corridors extend in long, quiet stretches where painted walls guide the eye, but offer little sense of companionship. The floors are smooth and cool beneath small feet, marked only by faint traces of movement left behind by others who pass through without pause. Doorways open into adjoining rooms filled with carefully arranged objects, each placed with intention, yet none disturbed by playful use. Narrow openings high above allow light to enter in angled lines, dividing the space into soft bands of brightness and shadow. The structure feels complete and orderly, yet it provides no corner that feels shaped specifically for a child's presence. The air here carries a different texture, one that feels slightly cooler as it moves along the stone surfaces. A faint dryness settles on the skin, mixed with the distant scent of dust that has been lifted and then resettled by unseen currents. When he walks, the sound of his own steps seems to follow him, echoing back in a softened rhythm that makes each movement feel more noticeable. Occasionally, a distant voice reaches him, filtered through layers of walls, losing its meaning while keeping its tone. The experience of moving through these corridors becomes one of quiet awareness, where each sensation feels isolated rather than shared. At certain moments, he pauses near an open doorway, his gaze shifting toward a space that appears no different from the one he has left. A servant may pass behind him, slowing briefly as if to guide him elsewhere, then continuing without making contact. Somewhere farther along, a curtain is drawn aside, allowing a brief change in light before it settles again. He turns slightly, following this small shift, though it leads to nothing new. The sequence of these minor changes forms a pattern of movement that continues without building toward anything, leaving each action to stand on its own. In his mind, the sense of distance begins to settle in quiet ways, shaping how he understands the spaces around him. He does not yet question why certain presences are missing, but he feels the lack of continuity in the people who move through his world. Each interaction feels complete in itself, without extending into something lasting. The corridors do not guide him toward familiarity, but toward repetition without connection. In this unfolding awareness, his childhood takes shape not through shared moments, but through a series of separate experiences that do not gather into a single, steady feeling of belonging. In a smaller chamber, set slightly apart from the main corridors, objects meant for learning are arranged with quiet intention. Low stools sit beside narrow tables, their surfaces holding small figurines, painted tablets, and simple tools shaped for practice rather than play. The walls here are decorated with orderly symbols and scenes that suggest instruction, guiding the eye in a steady progression from one image to another. A single window allows light to fall directly across the table, illuminating the objects with a clarity that feels deliberate. The space appears prepared for attention and focus, yet it lacks the scattered signs of curiosity that might come from a child freely exploring. The atmosphere within this room carries a subtle mixture of chalk dust and warmed wood, creating a dry and faintly textured scent that lingers close to the surfaces. When his fingers touch the edge of a tablet, the sensation is firm and slightly rough, offering resistance rather than softness. The quiet here feels different from the rest of the palace, more concentrated, as if sound itself is expected to remain contained. Even the smallest movement, like the shifting of a stool or the brushing of a hand across the table, creates a noticeable presence that does not easily fade. The experience of being here draws attention inward, toward the objects rather than toward any shared interaction. A tutor enters with measured steps, carrying a rolled piece of papyrus that he places carefully upon the table. He gestures toward the markings, guiding the young king's attention without raising his voice. The child leans slightly forward, observing the shapes, his hand moving slowly as he traces a line that has been shown to him. The tutor watches closely, offering brief corrections with small movements of his hand rather than extended explanation. After a time, the lesson pauses, not because it has reached a clear end, but because the sequence of actions has been completed. The tutor gathers the materials and leaves as quietly as he arrived. Within this process, the child begins to form an understanding of learning that feels structured yet distant. Knowledge is presented to him in clear forms, yet it arrives without the warmth of shared discovery. He absorbs what is placed before him, though the experience feels more like receiving than engaging. The absence of a guiding presence that remains beyond the lesson leaves each moment isolated, without connection to what comes before or after. In this way, even the act of learning becomes part of a childhood shaped by separation, where growth occurs within carefully prepared spaces that do not extend into lasting companionship. In the hours that follow the lessons, a routine begins to form around the young king, shaped by repeated actions rather than by personal choice. Attendants arrive at certain times, guiding him gently from one room to another, their movements practiced and precise. Meals are brought on low trays, arranged in careful patterns that suggest order more than appetite. He is seated, offered food, and observed in quiet intervals, though conversation remains limited to brief and functional exchanges. Afterward, his hands are washed, his garments adjusted, and he is led again through the familiar spaces, where each part of the day follows the one before it with quiet consistency. The sensory quality of these routines carries a steady rhythm that settles into his awareness over time. The warmth of water poured over his hands creates a brief contrast against the cooler air of the room. The texture of bread feels soft and slightly dry as he holds it, while the taste remains simple, leaving no strong impression. The faint clinking of vessels and the soft folding of cloth mark each stage of the process, forming a pattern of sound that repeats without drawing attention to itself. Even the light seems to shift in predictable ways, moving across the floor as the day continues, marking the passage of time without interruption. At certain moments, small variations appear within this routine, though they do not alter its overall shape. An attendant may hesitate briefly before placing a dish, adjusting its position as if seeking a more precise alignment. Another may step closer than usual, watching more carefully before stepping back again. The child himself might pause, holding an object a little longer before setting it down, as if considering it beyond its immediate use. These subtle changes pass quickly, leaving the larger sequence untouched, yet they introduce slight differences that suggest a quiet awareness beneath the repetition. Within this structure, his understanding of time begins to take form not as a series of meaningful events, but as a flow of repeated actions that carry him forward. He does not measure the day by anticipation or memory, but by the quiet sequence of what comes next. Each moment feels complete in itself, without extending into something larger or more connected. The absence of variation does not trouble him directly, yet it shapes how he experiences his surroundings, creating a sense of continuity that exists without depth. In this way, his early years unfold through patterns that guide him steadily, while leaving little space for something more personal to take hold. In the outer courtyards, where the palace opens slightly toward the sky, the young king is sometimes brought to spend quiet intervals under watchful eyes. The ground here is smoother and lighter in color, reflecting more of the sun, while low walls define the edges without enclosing the space completely. A few small trees grow in measured positions, their leaves casting thin patterns of shade that shift slowly across the surface. Decorative pools rest near the center, their water held still within carved stone borders. Everything appears arranged for balance and visibility, offering space to move, yet leaving little sense of privacy or retreat. The experience of being in this open area carries a different sensation, shaped by warmth and a broader presence of air. Sunlight touches the skin more directly, creating a gentle heat that lingers even in shaded corners. The faint sound of water from the pool reaches him in soft intervals, blending with distant echoes from beyond the courtyard walls. When he breathes, the air feels less confined, carrying a lighter scent of stone warmed by the day. The texture beneath his feet feels firmer here, less softened by coverings, making each step more noticeable. These elements create a setting that feels wider, yet not more inviting. During these moments, he may walk a short distance across the courtyard, guided loosely by attendants who remain nearby without engaging him directly. A small object might be placed in his hands, something simple, intended to occupy his attention for a time. He turns it slowly, examining its shape, then lowers it again without clear purpose. An attendant watches from a short distance, stepping forward only when necessary, then returning to stillness. The sequence of actions unfolds without interruption, yet without building toward interaction, leaving each movement to pass quietly into the next. Within his awareness, the openness of this space does not translate into a feeling of freedom, but into a different form of distance. The wider surroundings do not bring him closer to others, but instead emphasize how separate each presence remains. He observes what is placed before him, yet does not feel drawn into it. The sky above, the ground beneath, and the figures around him all exist within his view, yet none seem to form a connection that holds. In this way, even the open courtyard becomes part of a childhood shaped by absence, where space expands, but closeness does not follow. As evening approaches, the palace begins to shift into a quieter pattern, one guided by fading light rather than by structured routine. Lamps are placed along the walls, their small flames creating soft circles that gather in the corners of each room. Shadows stretch across the floors, joining together in uneven shapes that move slowly as the light adjusts. The young king is led back through the corridors, past the same columns and painted walls, though they now appear different under the dim glow. The scale of the space feels more pronounced in this light, as if the distance between objects has quietly grown. The atmosphere carries a deeper stillness at this hour, shaped by the absence of daytime movement. The air cools slightly, settling against the skin with a softness that replaces the warmth of earlier hours. The faint scent of burning oil becomes more noticeable, drifting gently from each lamp and filling the enclosed spaces. Sounds are fewer now, limited to the occasional step or the quiet adjustment of a curtain. Even these small noises seem to carry farther, as if the palace itself is listening more closely. The experience of this time feels slower, not through intention, but through the way each detail lingers a little longer. He is guided into his chamber, where preparations for rest unfold with careful attention. An attendant arranges the coverings on his bed, smoothing the fabric with slow, practiced movements. Another adjusts a nearby lamp, lowering its light so that the room is held in a softer glow. The child sits briefly, his gaze moving across the familiar objects that surround him, before he is guided to lie down. The attendants step back once their tasks are complete, leaving the space gradually, their presence fading without farewell. The sequence ends not with a clear moment, but with a quiet withdrawal. In the stillness that follows, his awareness settles into the space around him, shaped by the absence of voices and movement. The day does not leave behind strong impressions, but rather a series of moments that do not connect into a single memory. As he lies within the carefully prepared room, the distance he has felt throughout the day remains, unchanged by the passage of time. Sleep approaches not as a comfort, but as a continuation of this quiet separation. In this way, his childhood moves forward, not marked by closeness or shared experience, but by a steady presence of absence that surrounds him even in rest. Thousands of servants, a vast empire, and a throne waiting for his command. But while the world looked up to him as a living God, his own body was beginning to betray him. Why did the ruler of the Nile have to lean on a staff just to cross his own room? The mystery of Tutankhamun's fragile health isn't just a medical record. It's the key to his tragic fate. The figure of the young Tutankhamun moves through the inner halls with a form that does not align with the strength expected of his title. His frame appears slight beneath the layers of linen that hang carefully from his shoulders, shaped more by arrangement than by natural balance. One leg carries his weight unevenly, creating a subtle tilt in his posture as he steps forward. A staff is often placed within his reach, not as a symbol alone, but as something quietly necessary. The spaces around him are wide and formal, yet his movement through them feels measured, shaped by a body that does not fully support the role it represents. The experience of movement carries its own quiet effort, felt in ways that are not spoken aloud. Each step creates a soft pressure through the floor and into his limbs, a sensation that lingers longer than the motion itself. The touch of the staff against the ground produces a faint, steady sound that accompanies him, marking his progress through the corridors. The air brushes lightly against his skin as he moves, yet even this gentle contact seems to register more clearly, as if his awareness is drawn inward toward each physical sensation. The body does not move freely, but through a careful negotiation with its own limitations. At times, his pace slows further, not by intention, but as a response to the strain that gathers gradually. An attendant may step closer, adjusting the position of the staff or offering a steadying presence without drawing attention. He pauses near a column, allowing his weight to settle before continuing, his gaze lowering briefly toward the ground as if measuring the next step. The movement resumes in small increments, each action following the last with quiet precision. These adjustments do not interrupt the flow of the day, yet they shape it in subtle ways, guiding how and where he moves. Within his awareness, the body becomes something that both belongs to him and resists him. He does not yet name the difficulty, but he feels it in the way effort replaces ease. The expectations placed upon him do not lessen, even as his physical form responds differently to each demand. There is a growing sense that his presence is observed not only for who he is, but for how he moves, how he stands, how he endures. In this early stage, the body does not fully reveal its limits, yet it quietly shapes his experience, creating a life that unfolds through careful balance rather than natural strength. Within the private chambers where he spends much of his time, the arrangement of objects begins to reflect an awareness of his physical needs. Low seats are placed closer together, reducing the distance he must cross, while supports are positioned along the edges of the room in ways that appear intentional yet discreet. Cushions are layered to soften the surfaces where he rests, their shapes adjusted to hold his body in a more stable position. Even the pathways between objects feel subtly guided, as if the room itself has been arranged to accommodate a slower and more careful movement. The sensory experience of these spaces carries a quiet intimacy, shaped by textures that respond gently to contact. The softness of layered fabric beneath him creates a sense of relief, though it does not fully remove the underlying discomfort. When he shifts his position, the slight resistance of the cushions becomes noticeable, pressing back in a way that reminds him of his own weight. The air here feels warmer, held within the enclosed space, carrying faint traces of oils used to soothe the body. Each sensation is subtle, yet it gathers into a continuous awareness that does not fade easily. At certain moments, small adjustments take place as he responds to the needs of his body. He may shift his legs slightly, seeking a position that feels more balanced, or adjust the angle of his back against the support behind him. An attendant notices these movements and steps forward to reposition a cushion or offer a steadier surface. These actions occur without discussion, guided by observation rather than instruction. The sequence of movement and response continues quietly, forming a pattern where the body leads and the surroundings follow. Within his perception, the relationship between his body and the space around him becomes more defined. He begins to sense how his environment adapts to him, even as he adapts to it. There is no clear separation between effort and rest, as both are shaped by the same physical limitations. The awareness of his condition does not arrive as a single realization, but as a gradual understanding formed through repeated experience. In this way, his body becomes a constant presence in his life, not as something separate from his role, but as something that quietly influences every moment he moves or remains at rest. In the shaded colonnades where movement is expected to appear composed and deliberate, his steps take on a rhythm shaped by effort rather than ease. The floor stretches ahead in long, uninterrupted lines, bordered by pillars that create a sense of order and direction. His figure passes between them slowly, the space around him emphasizing each motion. The staff touches the ground at regular intervals, not only supporting him, but defining the pace at which he moves. The distance between one column and the next feels longer in practice than it appears, turning even a short passage into a sequence that must be completed with attention. The experience of walking through this space gathers into a quiet series of sensations that remain close to the body. The contact of his foot against the ground carries a subtle unevenness, shifting his balance slightly with each step. The grip of the staff in his hand feels firm, its surface smooth yet solid, anchoring his movement as he progresses forward. The air moves gently across his face, offering a brief coolness that contrasts with the warmth held within his limbs. Each sensation arrives clearly, not overwhelming, but persistent enough to shape how he experiences the act of moving. At a certain point, his pace slows further, not as a decision, but as a response to the strain that builds over time. An attendant walking nearby adjusts his position, stepping closer without drawing attention, ready to assist if needed. The young king pauses, shifting his weight onto the staff for a moment longer than before, his body leaning slightly as he steadies himself. After this brief pause, he continues, though the rhythm has changed, becoming more measured and deliberate. The movement resumes, but with a subtle difference that reflects the effort required to maintain it. Within his awareness, the act of walking becomes more than a simple transition from one place to another. It carries a quiet meaning, shaped by the balance between what is expected of him and what his body allows. He does not question the need to move, Yet he feels the difference between motion that flows and motion that must be managed. This awareness does not arrive as frustration, but as a gradual understanding that his body defines the boundaries of his experience. In this way, each step becomes part of a larger pattern, where movement itself is both necessary and carefully sustained. In the hours when the body is prepared rather than moved, a quieter routine unfolds within enclosed chambers where attendants work with careful attention. Oils are brought in small containers, their surfaces reflecting the low light as they are opened and set aside. The young king is seated upon a low platform, his limbs positioned gently by practiced hands that guide without force. His arms are lifted slightly, then lowered again, as the attendants apply the oils in slow, even motions. The arrangement of his body becomes part of the process, shaped not by his own direction, but by those who understand how to ease the strain that gathers within him. The sensation of touch becomes more present during these moments, carrying a different quality than the movement of walking or standing. The warmth of the oils spreads gradually across his skin, creating a softness that contrasts with the tension held beneath. Fingers move in steady patterns, pressing lightly, then releasing, allowing the body to respond in small ways that are felt rather than seen. The air in the room feels heavier, filled with the scent of herbs that linger close and do not disperse quickly. Breathing slows slightly, not as an effort, but as a response to the calm that settles through these repeated gestures. At times, a subtle shift occurs as the body responds unevenly to the attention it receives. A limb may tense briefly before relaxing again, or a slight adjustment may be needed to maintain balance on the platform. An attendant notices these changes and adapts their movements, altering the pressure of their hands or repositioning his posture with quiet precision. These adjustments happen without interruption, woven into the flow of the routine, as if they were always expected. The process continues, shaped by a constant awareness of how the body reacts from one moment to the next. Within his awareness, these periods of care create a different understanding of his physical form. The body is not only something that limits him, but also something that can be tended, adjusted, and supported through the actions of others. He does not fully separate the discomfort from the relief, as both are part of the same experience that defines his days. There is a quiet recognition that his strength does not come from independence, but from the presence of those who maintain his balance. In this way, his body becomes part of a shared process, where its fragility is met not with resistance, but with careful and continuous attention. During moments when he is brought into more public spaces, the body is arranged as carefully as the surroundings themselves. Garments are layered with precision, their folds adjusted to fall evenly across his form, concealing imbalance while presenting a composed appearance. Jewelry is placed with intention, drawing the eye upward toward symbols of authority rather than toward the way he stands. The staff remains near, yet it is held in a manner that suggests ceremony as much as necessity. From a distance, his figure appears complete, framed by attendants and architecture in a way that emphasizes presence rather than effort. The sensory experience of these appearances carries a different weight, shaped by awareness rather than comfort. The linen rests against his skin with a slight heaviness, its layers holding warmth that builds gradually beneath the surface. The ornaments press lightly at points along his body, their presence constant, adding to the sense of being held in place. The sounds around him shift as well, voices quieter, footsteps more measured, as if the space itself responds to his presence. Each sensation gathers into a steady awareness that does not overwhelm, yet remains present throughout the duration of his time in view. At certain moments, a subtle adjustment reveals the effort required to maintain this composed form. His grip on the staff tightens slightly, or his posture shifts just enough to redistribute weight that has begun to strain. An attendant steps closer, not directly intervening, but positioning themselves in a way that offers support if needed. A brief pause may occur, small enough to pass unnoticed by most, before he resumes his stance with renewed steadiness. These minor changes unfold within the larger stillness of the scene, shaping it without disrupting its surface. Within his perception, these public moments carry a quiet understanding of contrast between appearance and experience. He becomes aware that what is seen does not fully reflect what is felt, yet both exist together without conflict. The body that is presented to others serves a purpose beyond comfort, fulfilling expectations that extend beyond his own experience. There is no clear separation between who he is and how he is seen, only a gradual blending of both into a single presence. In this way, his fragility becomes something that is both hidden and carried, shaping his role without defining it entirely. As the day draws toward its quieter hours, his body begins to show the accumulated weight of movement and effort in ways that are not immediately visible, but steadily felt. He is guided back into his private chamber, where the arrangement of objects welcomes rest rather than display. The staff is set aside within reach, leaning against a carved surface that holds it in place. Cushions are adjusted once more, layered to support his frame as he lowers himself with care. The room feels closer at this time, shaped by the soft light of lamps that gather in corners and reduce the scale of the surrounding space. The sensory quality of this moment carries a deeper awareness of fatigue, though it is expressed gently rather than sharply. The contact between his body and the cushioned surface creates a slow release of pressure, easing some of the strain that has built throughout the day. The air feels warmer and more enclosed, carrying a faint trace of oils that remain from earlier care. Breathing settles into a quieter rhythm, shaped by the stillness of the room and the absence of movement. Each sensation arrives with clarity, not demanding attention, but forming a continuous presence that reflects the condition of his body. At certain points, small movements continue as he adjusts to find a position that offers greater ease. His hand may shift slightly along the surface beside him, or his leg may move in a careful attempt to reduce discomfort. An attendant observes these changes and responds with quiet precision, repositioning a cushion or adjusting the angle of his body. These actions are gentle and measured, unfolding without interruption to the calm that surrounds them. The process continues until his movements lessen, and the need for adjustment begins to fade into stillness. Within his awareness, the experience of the day settles into a quiet understanding of limitation and endurance. He does not separate himself from his body, yet he begins to recognize how it shapes the boundaries of his life. The effort required to move, to stand, to maintain presence becomes part of how he understands his role. There is no clear resistance to this condition, only an acceptance that forms gradually through repetition. In this way, his fragile body becomes not only a source of difficulty, but a constant measure of how he exists within the world around him. In the hollow silence of the palace, Tutankhamun remains a king trapped in a body that fails him more with every passing sunset. But while the world sees a god, others see a weakness to be exploited. The boy king is standing on the edge of a precipice, and the vultures are already closing in. Who will stand by him, and who is waiting for him to fall? The true tragedy is only just beginning. Join us tomorrow for part 2, as we reveal the dark forces rising to claim the throne of the Puppet King. The mystery continues.